Dawnblade. Love it, hate it, get celestial fired across the map by it. It's kind of in danger of losing some of its cooler features because Bungie's kind of kicking around the idea of, what if we just kind of cut some stuff out of the subclasses in order to make them more IP defining when we're starting to fit these things into this stasis style of subclass selection? Well, Bungie, I offer you an alternative. Welcome back, Guardians, to another TDT video. I'm your humble host, Meesum777. Today we're going to take a look at Dawnblade. Something that you've seen us do from other videos is rework some of these subclasses, and it's Dawnblade's turn. I know I kind of went out of order here. This was supposed to be Hunter this time around, but Dawnblade was calling to me, and having played with my Valkyrie build, as you're seeing in the background here, I really wanted to make this because it's been on my mind. It's just been right there, bugging me like a mosquito. I can't get rid of it. So I wanted to get this ideas out here to you. What are we doing here, in case you're not familiar with how this works? Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to reconstruct how these light-based subclasses work in the style of those darkness-based, those stasis-based subclasses. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, Bungie's been kind of kicking around the idea of, well, maybe we cut some stuff in order to make sure that it fits within this new system. I am going to do my best to, A, keep what you love. Make sure that everything that you love about a subclass stays there, or at the very least, give it a good equivalent. So if something maybe doesn't really work right now, or if it's not getting run that much, we give it something that makes it seem more interesting, which, number two, we want to also allow more ways to play, not just in simply adding new aspects and fragments, which we will be doing towards the end of the video, but also just by allowing certain things to interact with other things. It makes for an interesting and unique experience. Mixing and matching to kind of come up with a new amalgamation of builds that are fun to play in and of themselves. And lastly, kind of already mentioned this one, I want to buff the boring stuff. So anytime you've got something that just doesn't get used that much, let's bring that up just a little bit so that it has a little bit of a facelift and is more fun and more engaged with by the community. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. Every time you subscribe, a Stasis Hunter whiffs a Shatter Dive. Thank you. So, let's get going into this here. I want to first start off with some of the basic stuff, the stuff that really isn't going to get touched, and of course that is the jumps, the grenades, and the rifts. These are all great. It's no reason to reinvent the wheel. These all work just fine, so we're not going to be touching them. However, what we will be working with is the melees. Now, I want to make sure that you're paying attention here, because some of this stuff is going to look like at face value that it got nerfed. Some of it's going to be just an obvious rework, and some of it's going to be untouched. Starting off with the thing that gets untouched, Celestial Fire. Send out a spiral of 3 explosive solar blast. No reason to touch it. I think that this melee is fantastic. It's great. I think it's pretty well balanced as well. I don't think it needs really any buffs, really any nerfs. Previously, maybe before Stasis came out, I would have argued this might be a bit of a nerf territory, but I mean, with the way that Stasis currently is, let's just leave it where it's at. Touch this later, maybe. Anyway. Second up, we've got Igniting Touch. Strike an enemy to ignite them and cause damage over time. This is Bottom Trees. You might notice that the explosion that you get from Bottom Tree is gone, and there's a reason for that. I am giving this melee in particular slightly more burn damage in terms of like the amount of damage that it's actually dealing, so that it's a little bit more of a threat for a longer period of time, and also the way that these aspects and fragments, which like I said, we will touch on later, so it'll all kind of click together. The way that they're going to interact with this is going to be a lot more powerful than what we've previously seen. So I want to make sure that this melee doesn't get out of hand, okay? Next up, we've got Guiding Flame. This is the Middle Tree Well of Radiance's thing. Striking an enemy empowers you and nearby allies. And there's the change. Kills grant an Orb of Light. So it removes that damage over time, but if you get a kill, it will give you that Orb of Light, allowing you to make some melee-based builds around Orbs of... I guess I'm calling them Orbs of Light. They're Orbs of Power now. I'm always going to just call them Orbs of Light. Bungie, you can't make me. And again, the reason why I'm pulling off of certain things and adding into other things is, A, I think that this as a idea is much more suited for a support, like being that if you wanted to play this as a support tool, having that Orb of Light is a much better choice rather than the damage over time. And again, the reason why I'm pulling off the damage over time is we're going to work with it with some of those aspects and fragments later. Speaking of aspects, let's start with number 1, Icarus Dash. Press dodge midair to dodge twice. It's nothing new. This Icarus Dash is probably one of the funnest experiences on Warlock, but I thought, what if we made it even more fun? So, Use in Daybreak, Icarus Dash, in Daybreak to launch yourself aggressively at the cost of super energy. The idea here being that if you do that Icarus Dash and you hold on to the button to continuously do that Icarus Dash, you'll continue to burn your super energy, but you'll go flying at the target. This would allow you to go really, really freaking fast. And of course, that super energy burn is that trade-off. Instead of, having to Icarus Dash one after the other, after the other, after the other to get to the target, you can just strap a rocket to yourself and blast your way to the other side. I think this is a fair trade-off, and honestly, I'd say this is probably going to be, roughly speaking, similar to the same speed that we have right now. The only difference is that it'll have a faster acceleration, so you'll be a little bit more capable of controlling how much you're actually, how much oomph you're actually putting into it. Let me know what you think of this one. I know this one can always be dangerous whenever we, mess with something that's already pretty good like this, but being that this is only capable of, activating in super, I think this is fine. Let's roll forward. This is a rework. Phoenix Flame. This is a replacement for Phoenix Dive. Press and hold, crouch, or whatever button you have, while in air to quickly descend to the ground and cause a solar wind that knocks targets away and ignites them. Daybreak projectiles seek towards targets. So we've got the Phoenix Dive-esque style of movement, but instead of healing ourselves, which I know some people, I've actually asked some people who, I know, crazy, main the bottom tree Dawnblade, I asked them how they would think about this, and the general response is, as long as I got a little bit of damage resistance while I was doing this, I would be okay with this. I think using this as a general crowd control tool, as obviously we are adding the Igniting Touch kind of damage over time effect to it as well, I think this will make this whole thing a lot more synergistic. The healing was always cool, and of course you could still use it in your Dawnblade to cause that little explosion, for free, but I think this makes the class as a whole a lot more interesting to interact with. All right, let me know what you think of that one. I know this is a bit of a rework. I don't like cutting things out and replacing it with other things, but I think this can be a good exception to that rule. All right, let's roll forward here. Well of Radiance, this only change that we're adding to this is that instead of it being like a just by default makes it this way, it's an option. Just like how Top Tree Sentinel works, you can press and hold your super in order to plant the sword in the ground and get the Well of Radiance. Alternatively, you just have a normal Dawnblade style of super. It works just fine. I mean, there's nothing fancy about it. You don't have any aspects or anything, modifying it at the moment, so you can do it just like that if you want to. This makes it a little bit more viable in terms of PvP because it has that flexibility to go one way or the other. All right? Let's roll on to the more interesting rework here. This is the first rework, the brand new thing that you're going to see, called Brimstone. Grenades ignite targets, causing damage over time. Now, we had this back in D1 on Sunsingers, and it was quite powerful. But the thing is I think that in D2, being that all light-based abilities, I know Stasis is a little bit of an outlier right now, but all light-based abilities compared to D1 are a lot weaker, generally speaking. We tend to kind of we're able to buff them a little bit more, but generally speaking, like just by itself, it's not as strong. They don't deal as much damage, they don't come back as fast. So I think bringing this ability back as a sort of damage over time build is a great way to open up a new aspect of the Dawnblade that we haven't seen before. And again, we've got some fragments later down the list that's going to click all of these together and make it really synergistic. Let's roll forward. Next aspect, something you've seen before. Heat rises, hold grenade to consume it, and extend your glide time and temporarily improve your in-air accuracy. Kills while airborne extend this effect, so something we've already seen before. Nothing crazy. Another thing we've seen before is Divine Protection, but I've added a slight rework to it. So same thing you've seen before, so hold grenade to convert it into a blessing. That grants you and allies who pick it up an overshield and healing. Seen it, right? Nothing new. But here is something I have appended in order to make this ability worth the aspect slot. Activating while gliding will hover you mid-air, then throwing the blessing will boost you towards the target. So what this gives you, it is essentially a mock-up version of Mercy's passive from Overwatch. So when you're holding on to that Blessing Grenade, you then throw it at a target, it'll push you towards where that's going. Think of it in terms of the same speed as like a more same general distance covered but more drawn out type of Icarus Dash. It allows you to cover gaps a little bit better, so maybe you want to get on top of somebody to cover them a little bit, provide them with a little bit of support. You can prime that grenade and then throw the blessing at them and then cover to them. One question I get every now and then whenever we've got things that interact with abilities, and you can slot multiple of them because you can theoretically slot both Heat Rises and Divine Protection. How would that work? Well, the grenade would start off as the Divine Protection, and then after, let's say, a second of being in Divine Protection, it would then consume it. So you have an idea. Also, if you were to consume the Divine Protection grenade, you would have both a Heat Rises and an Overshield. So that gives you an idea. It's essentially like a weird version of Devour, I suppose, but with an Overshield, and yeah, it kind of works out that way, if that's what if you're wondering how that would work. Let's move on to the fragments, as obviously this is where the stuff gets particularly interesting. Fragment number 1, Induction Airborn Final Blows Refund Melee Energy. This is currently available on Top Tree Dawnblade, as obviously under a different name, but we wanted to make sure that we break open the subclass a little bit more so that you can, you're not overpowered, you're not getting all this stuff by default, and you're able to add more. I don't think Top Tree Dawnblade needs any more help in being more powerful. Maybe except for expanding laterally as opposed to vertically, if that makes sense. So instead of making it just strictly better, making it have more options, which don't necessarily make it better, just make it different. I hope that makes sense. I hope I didn't lose you on that one. Anyway, next up, Fragment Wing Sun, fire weapons and use abilities while gliding. Again, we've seen this before. Now that this is a fragment, I think that the Dawnblade as a whole will feel a lot better. Honestly, I could really see an argument for all of the Warlock movement abilities being able to fire and shoot and do all this stuff while in the air, at obviously the cost of in-air accuracy. As hunters and such, the reason why they're so good in PvP is because they can jump and shoot and do all that stuff at the same time. So I think this is okay as a fragment, but you'll have to let me know. Rolling forward, Benevolent Dawn, you guys have seen this before. It's a slight nerf to it, but we've just, not really a nerf, it's just broken up under a different name. You'll hear what I'm saying here. Healing or empowering allies increases rift energy regeneration. So obviously the grenade and the melee aren't in that list. That's because next fragment, Benevolent Grace, healing or empowering allies grants grenade and melee regeneration. So if you want to spec specifically into the rift, you can do that and slot that other fragment for somewhere else. Or if you want to just go for the grenade and melee, you can then use what you would have had for the rift regeneration and use that elsewhere as well. You might think to yourself, I don't think rift is equal to grenade and melee, but there's a fragment later down the line that might change your mind. Let's go through the rest of these though. Everlasting Fire kills and super extend its duration. Now, first glance you go, whoa, I don't think Top Tree Dawn needs the ability to have a longer super. But here's the thing, you gotta remember, if you take this fragment over another fragment, you lose some aspect of the kit. So are you willing as a Top Tree Dawnblade main to give up your in-air ability to fire and shoot and grenade and whatever, all that other stuff, for the ability to have a longer super? If that's a difficult question, that means they're probably balanced. Or maybe take it the other route. Are you willing to give up your ability to get your melee energy back while you're in the air for the ability to get a longer super? Again, if that's a tough question, then probably balanced. Let's roll forward. Radiance Super Impacts cause devastating solar explosions and launch a streak of deadly flames. This is something that was already available on Bottom Tree Dawnblade, but now you can just generally make the super, if you want to, a little bit more effective. Kind of an interesting interaction if you have this fragment on the Well of Radiance Super Aspect. This would allow you to, when you planted the sword into the ground, essentially cause a mild explosion wherever it landed. So that's kind of interesting. And anyway, these next two are the two new options that you're going to be able to have in your kit, assuming, any of this stuff gets, I don't know, tweet this at Bungie. Maybe this stuff eventually gets put into the game. I'm sure there's some people out there that really like this ideas and some people that hate it. But if you like this ideas, maybe tweet it at Bungie or something. I don't know. Anyway, next up, these fragments are new. First off, Kindling Igniting enemies grants grenade energy. Ooh, ah. So one of the things that comes to mind is that this actually will have some of its ability usage for some of the other weapons that exist in the game. So this would have synergy with something, let's say, like Le Monarque. Just like how currently Le Monarque has synergy with Middle Tree Golden Gun, where you have the Fan of Knives, the Blade Barrage, and all that stuff, that already works with it. This would also have some of that synergy with it. Kind of interesting. Maybe a little bit strong, but of course we could always just tone down the amount of energy that this gives back. That's another thing. A side note here. For the people who nitpick and say like, well, that would be a little too strong, that would be a little too weak, you can always adjust the number. You can always adjust the percentage so that it's not quite that strong. So if you feel like this is too much, just turn the percentage down until it feels reasonable. Anyway, next up, we have Swelter. Rifts ignite enemies who stand inside of them. Now, at first you're thinking to yourself, hey, that's kind of cool. I like the ability to, place a rift down, and if something challenges me, they get burned a little bit. Of course, it has synergy with some of my other fragments, and maybe I get my grenade energy back, yada yada. But, here's where the big brain game design comes in right here. The reason why I have it specifically set to the rifts, obviously it might make sense for it being Dawnblade and such, but why the rifts in particular is because this would open up those other exotics that maybe don't get used as much, such as the Sanguine's Alchemy, the Vesper of Radius, the Stag, and in particular, the Prometheum Spurs. I want to, just like how Stasis made the Claws of Ahamkara and Karnstein Armlets good, I want to open up some of those exotics that don't get used by making the subclass support them more. Imagine a world where you're running Prometheum Spur and you get a kill with your Dawnblade and it summons what is essentially a bigger sunspot on the ground wherever it was placed. There would be kind of 2 rifts stacked on top of one another, so theoretically double the damage. Now, that's a cool build. That's something I want to try. Do you agree? I think that's hella cool. Giving this ability on this particular tree opens up those exotics that don't get used that much to give it a chance for the limelight. I love the idea. Obviously I'm the one who made the idea, so I'm going to pat my own self on the back, obviously, right? But I don't know. It looks pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. You guys know I always try to interact. I'll at least leave a thumb and a heart, as many comments as I can, as long as they're respectful. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much for the recent subs. We're so close to 10K. I think we can do it with this video. Maybe we already have by the time this goes out. But anyway, I appreciate the hell out of you guys. Bless your faces, and deuces.